This is the Acts 2028 podcast,
where two young Church of God pastors
discuss the challenges and victories we face in leading revitalization.
I am T.J. Samuelu.
I am Brian Seidel.
I am in an urban context in Seattle, Washington.
I am in a suburban and rural context in Boise, Idaho.
I am in a liberal state.
I am in a conservative state.
My ministry background is in missions.
My ministry background is in youth ministry.
And yet we are both in our first lead roles.
To help God revitalize the existing church in the Pacific Northwest.
We are helping each other.
And you.
To truly live out Acts 2028.
TJ, here we are again, not just for our next episode, but we're actually wrapping up this first season of our podcast. And, you know, we got, again, just a lot going on, wrapping up the school year, moving on to summer plans and different things. But can you believe we already have an entire season done?
I know. In some regards, it seems like it's gone super fast, especially as we've, done this every couple weeks. Those weeks have just kind of rolled together, but I'm glad that we've been able to do it. And I'm glad that, we've been able to discuss different things to help. And my prayer is that not only has this been a benefit for us, but that this season has helped reach people and honor God's people for his kingdom and those things. And so we've covered a lot of ground over this past season as we bring that to an end, but so grateful, just to hear the feedback from people, their hearts and their appreciation, whether that's the things that we've talked about with people that have passed on, that have run the race and won the prize, to just how do we deal with these things? And it's good to be able to have a support system, as we talked about too, to be able to bounce those off. But I'm glad that we've made it to this point. I'm looking forward to even more in the future.
So yeah, definitely. So as we think back again, that's what part of what we want to do today is kind of go back over, recap some of what we've covered in the season. Like I said, for those that are listening, we hope that you've hung with us well. We hope that you've found some value in our conversations. And again, we would love to hear from you. So if again, we have heard from some of you, but we'd love to hear from more as you listen to this. And even if you're kind of behind or get caught up and read that, we'd love to hear from you. And you can just email us at acts2028podcast@gmail.com, or you can leave comments on any of our social media accounts, or comment on your platform, on whatever you listen to. Some of them allow you to do that. So again, we love to hear from you, and even not just what you've liked or how what's been gone well for you from this season, but also if you wanted to let us know what you'd like to hear in upcoming seasons. Again, part of our plan, right, is that we are going to do this in seasons where we have 10 episodes, and which will cover about half the year, and then we're planning to take a month or so off and just to plan for the next one and get caught up on other things, and then we'll jump back in to season 2 here at the end of the summer. And so about August, again, just watch for season 2 to start up again. But like I said, we'd love to hear from you and just some things that you would maybe like for us to talk about or to cover, or some guests you'd like to hear from, whatever that might be. So let us know what that might be. But also today, though, before we kind of wrap up season 1, is one thing we plan to talk about was the role of our families in our churches. And one, just not only how we balance our family life, but also how they invest with us into our churches and the ministry that God's called us to. Because the reality is God has put a call on my heart and your heart, TJ, right, as pastors, but our families are a part of that call. And they, no matter how loosely they're involved or closely they are involved, they live out that call as much as we do. So again, just something that we want to look at today.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's integral to not only do what we do, but to do it effectively, right? Because this is part of why we have the discussion is we want to be equipped and we want to be able to empower. And I think, at its purest root, obviously ministry starts at home for us.
Yes.
We have these churches that we talked about that we're leading and helping, but at the same time, our accountability to God and otherwise is the stewardship that we have of our own families and how they roll. I think you touched on a point that we're probably going to get into here, obviously deeper, but um, man, having a stake in the ministry from a family buy-in standpoint is, I think, is necessary. And I mean, I don't think that that should be from a standpoint that it's forced to where the thing that is that pushes them away is the faith that we're trying to sow into their life. But from a standpoint of, I think when you have a whole family buy-in, whether that's, your wife or your kids or those different things, and we'll talk about the roles that our kids play in our ministry. Um, I think that that sets you up for success, and it sets you up for, you have a common ground and you have a mutual understanding of what God is doing. And so that allows you guys to be successful in what you're doing. It's not just well, this is what dad does and that's his job. Because I don't think it's a job. It's obviously, we know it to be a calling. And so I think, how do we handle that? How do we get buy-in from our family? How do we get engagement in roles? And that doesn't mean that on the other part of that too, that's just a ton of free labor. But it's also just like, how do we engage with them in a positive way so that they can, take ownership in that their faith has an application piece that maybe others don't get a chance to have. And so how do you balance that? How do you make that work? And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of kicking a few of those things around and understanding where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, hey, I think before we talk about all those things, and again, all things that we need to talk about and address, but before that, let's just let our listeners know the makeup of our family. So again, we are both married. We both have wives that serve with us in various roles, and we also both have kids. So I'll start with with my wife, and actually, as we're recording this, today is actually my anniversary. And so it is our 19th anniversary. So we've been together though, we were together 5 years before we got married. So we've actually been together 24 years and we've been married 19 today. And then also, and we have 4 kids. So we have 3 boys that are our biological boys. And so our oldest is 17. And so he and my kids just finished their school year. So actually this is literally the first week of summer for them. So next year grades, right, is my oldest is 17. He's going to be a senior in high school. So he's already looking at colleges. I mean, we've been looking at that. But then my next son, he is 15 and he's going to be a sophomore next year in high school. And then I have a 12-year-old son who's going to be a 7th grader next year. So 2 in high school, 1 in middle school. And I said, and those are our biological kids because we adopted our daughter 2.5 years ago. So she is 2.5. I guess actually a little more than 2.5. So like I said, we adopted her. We got her as an infant. And so we were in the delivery room when she was born and took her home straight to our house. So again, we just an incredible blessing, and that's a completely different story, probably for a different episode, maybe next season, perhaps. But yeah, so we adopted her, and so she is 2.5. So I literally have a house full of teenagers and a toddler. So it comes from some very interesting exchanges in my house, and my house is never quiet. So that's the way that works. How about you, DJ?
Yeah, so actually here at our church, she's on staff. And so she actually has a role where she is handling a lot of the stuff, makes it look better, and communications. So she has a background in marketing. And so she really helps hold me together and communicate things to the church that maybe I think I am, but I'm not doing a great job. She really does a good job of handing that out to them. And then as far as our kiddos, we have 3. We go boy, girl, boy. So my girl's in the middle. And so my oldest is Trey, aka Talolotu Elakana Samuelu III, for those of you that are keeping score at home. And so we call him Trey to shorten that up for 3. And then TJ, that is obviously mine as well, but that's Talolotu Jr. because I was named after my dad. So when people ask me, is that a uncommon name? I say, no, there's 3 people in my direct family that have that name. I don't see what the big deal is. But yeah, so he's 11 right now. He's got a birthday coming up this month and he'll be 12, but he'll be starting middle school. So he'll be in 6th grade when we get back into school in the fall. And my daughter Elikana, she is 10, and she's going to be in 5th grade. So she'll be in her last year of elementary here. And then our youngest is a boy. His name is Isaiah. He is 7, and he will be in 2nd grade when we kick off in the fall. And so they all are here at the church, and they all play a role. And yeah, we'll probably talk about some of those responsibilities here coming up in a bit.
So yeah, definitely. So again, just so everybody understands, again, where we're coming from, what our homes look like. Again, we do have, again, married kids, balancing all of that along with leading our churches. And so, you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to make sure we talked about. And again, something that I think we need to get right in the church, and something that I think has kind of been messed up in the past. And I think part of what has led to some dysfunctional families of pastors. And again, that's just to say that's one of the reputations that I really wrestled with about going into being a pastor and to ministry as a career. Was what my kids and my family would be involved in, and what they would do to them. Because unfortunately, and I don't know if you've seen this, but the reputation that I saw was pastors' kids had a really hard road, right? Yeah. And pastors' kids would either grow up to be pastors themselves, or they would hate the church as adults. And I saw both of those in kind of my circles and churches that I grew up in. And so, again, I am a first generation pastor. It is not something that anybody in my family history has ever done before. And so when I felt that call, that was literally one of my struggles, one of my kind of arguments with God about pursuing ministry as a career, was that I did not want to do that to my kids. Right? And so that kind of has been a struggle, not a struggle, but again, something that's been in the forefront of my mind from the very beginning. Right, is that I wanted them to fall in love with God, and I also did not want them to be jaded by the church, right? Or to grow up as adults to hate the church because of how the church had, treated me or treated our family. And so, so that is definitely something that is a real issue. And so again, I don't know what your experience has been or how our listeners have been, but unfortunately, there is kind of that kind of black eye, I think, of church world and culture and the way that pastors' families can suffer.
Yeah. And I think part of that is kind of what we talked about was you have this piece where, maybe even it's not just our family issue. It starts with us, really. And I think there's part of this that the justification, and that's where I led in with ministry starts at home. I mean, I think so often pastors, we can try to justify and say, well, I've got this ministry that I need to keep going. And if it comes at a detriment to your own personal family, that can be a very tough, difficult thing. And so really, yeah, knowing that in my family, going back, we talked about, part of your heritage is the youth pastor side. Part of me, it's missions. And part of the reason why missions is so important is we do have that history in our family. My grandfather was a pastor in American Samoa. And so I think that was modeled, although he passed away before I was born and I didn't get a chance to see that. I see that what you're talking about through my dad and some of the others. So being a PK, so to speak, is never an easy thing. And in fact, there's a lot of oftentimes rebellion that's associated with that. And I think for me, I don't want that to be a crutch. I don't want that to be a reason for my kids to be frustrated or have any of those things. But yeah, my grandfather did it. In fact, that's when missionaries came, they brought my dad over, which full circle now that we're serving in Seattle, a suburb is Kirkland. And so when my dad landed from the islands, he landed right here about 15 minutes from now where we are serving. And that was the goal, was he was supposed to learn, be equipped, learn ministry, and go back and help take over my father's church. But he obviously, he didn't have that and didn't feel that call to complete that. And God had different plans for him. So yeah, it was modeled. I didn't get a chance to see it play itself out, but I know what that looks like. And, again, in my personal family, because of that influence, that was something that was a focal point for my parents and my upbringing. And so I think that that's there. And I think, maybe a little bit of an offshoot of that is one of the things that when I say it starts with us that we have to be cognizant of is uh, look, as good as we are and as equipped as we are, at our best, at our lowest, we know where we stand, but like at our best, if Satan can't get us to fall, realistically, he's going to go after our families and he's going to go after the things. And as pastors, we know this to be true even on our staffs. We have huge bullseyes on us as being lead pastors that are helping see this thing through. But man, even if we've talked about even roles that lay people role. If you're a pastor listening to this and you're reliant upon volunteers, you've lived this out at some point, because it's like, man, if it's not you and you're doing everything you can with your connectivity to God, you're putting on the armor of God every day and you're so reliant upon him. It's not a question as to why he would go after your next tiered people, whether that's your key volunteers, whether that's your family, whether there's other parts. And so I think it's important why we have this and not to just dismiss this, because it is a real thing and Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And we know that to be true, but greater is he who is in us. And so that is the part that we are talking about today is, man, how do we help? How do we get that? So yeah, I totally get that. And so I guess I do have a little bit of a cheat in the sense that I have a grandfather that went through this, but I didn't really get a chance to see that play itself out. But yeah, some of those same things you talked about, Brian, I have those same things. I don't want my kids to resent the church because it robbed them of time with their dad, or any of those other things that we've associated in the past. So really balancing that of serving wholeheartedly, but also being the best dad that we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as you mentioned a couple of times, the thing in that, right? Biblically speaking, your first ministry, no matter what your vocational call is, your first ministry is to be the spiritual leader of your family. And so you need to, again, lead your marriage. You need to lead your kids. You need to, again, talk about spiritual things at home, right? And again, not just about church events, not just about work, right? But again, are you discipling your own kids? Are you showing them, modeling what a daily walk with Jesus looks like, and plays out on a daily basis? Because again, they see what you do, and they are following. Especially, having a toddler in my house right now, you're just constantly reminded that monkey see, monkey do, right? And she's always saying things that we say and doing things that we do. And, she's learning so much about how you do life. And again, is Jesus a part of that? And, again, I was just a couple weeks ago. She once again came over and, part of my morning routine is I get up and, do my devotions. Right. And I read scripture and journal every morning. And again, not sermon prep. It's completely separate from anything I'm doing at church. And again, and she went and found her Bible, right? And she had her, her little Gideon Bible, and just, came over and sat down on the couch next to me. And, I just say that, like, my middle son, Curtis, again, he did that too when he was about that age. He found, and we have a picture of him, of finding his Bible and sitting down with me in the morning. And so, again, are you discipling your own kids? And I think that's where, again, if you're a pastor, if you're a lay leader, no matter what your role is in the church, the biblical mandate to us is that we are first discipling our own families, right? And that we are the spiritual leaders of our families. And so, and in our marriages and in that. And so make sure that you don't do that now, or that you do that, right? But don't cheat on your family because of the church, right? Don't not fulfill that requirement, that biblical requirement, which kind of in this whole topic, as we say that about, the time we spend at the church versus the time with our families and kind of all those things, that is, especially in a revitalization project, there's always more to do at the church, right? The work never stops. And I think that's part of the challenge as a pastor, as a vocational minister, is that, again, we don't clock out either, right? We can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm sorry you're struggling, sorry you're in the hospital, whatever. If we get that call, we go and we meet them. And so, again, we can't be like, yep, I will deal with that Monday at 9 a.m. Right. Like, again, just, that's not a part of the job. And so because of that, we can tend to cheat our families out of things that we should be at, right? Or to do, because there's always things to do at the church. The church people are always in need, right? And there's always more. And, that's been one of the things that has framed my mindset when it comes to this is Andy Stanley. I listened to a talk that Andy Stanley did, and he did at many different conferences and, large venues, those kind of things. Again, if you haven't heard him speak, he's one of the people I love listening to the most as far as preachers go. He's just very engaging, but he did a talk, and I remember it. And again, I don't remember the exact title, but something about, if you choosing to cheat or, something like that. But I remember his quote, and kind of the premise of that talk was, if you're going to cheat somebody, cheat the church, not your family. Right. And, there's been many times of that, because again, we make that call, right? We make that choice. Hey, am I going to do the next task on my to-do list and stay late at the office, or am I going to go home? Right. And, or whatever it is. And there's been time, and he said, he's like, cause somebody's going to get cheated because you do not have enough time in your life, to do it all. He's like, so if somebody's going to get cheated, make sure that the church gets cheated, not your family.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a simple thing is we've navigated this first year that's been so difficult with COVID and those things. So my oldest son, Trey, he will come, and part of this is by design so that when I'm gone, he's not pestering his two younger siblings for his mom. But no, he's been a really great help. And so some of the things that I look forward to is, even on a Saturday, like sermon prep, if, you just described that, you nailed it. Throughout the week, there's always another thing that you can run to, another thing that you can sink time into. And so if you push those margins a bit, means that Saturday I'm going to have a couple things I still need to complete because I chose to take on those tasks. Well, part of that is we try to make it fun. So him and I will come in, and we have a gym here at the church. And so, he wanted to pitch the other day. So he's throwing fastballs and stuff at me in the gym, and, just really connecting. And so trying to find ways that if I am away, that there is still an enrichment piece that is coming. And so when dad's there, he knows that he'll come and he'll fall. There's been times where we come in late, and so he'll play, or we'll shoot in the gym around the world with the basketball. And then he'll come up and he'll crash on the couch in my office and say, all right, Dad, wake me up when it's time to go home. And, so you try to find what is there. And like you said, even as a byproduct, you had queued up, actually, this is our normal day for recording, but I had to reach out to you earlier in the week and say, hey, I have someone coming home from the hospital. I might need to go help transition them home. And so do you have flexibility to where we can push to another day? And so those are commonplace, right? Those come up. And, that's where we're at. And so really what you said was so important, is to make sure. And if you have that, sometimes we have some of that flexibility. Yes, pastors do work other than Sundays. But, how do we do that in a way that helps our family? So if I cause and effect, if I pull on one thread and give up some here, I try to find ways where I can make that up in a way that maybe isn't normal. So that would have been Sunday. So Sunday after church, it was the weekend. Kids didn't have the little thing that they normally have going on. So we went to the park and we played home run derby as a family at the Little League baseball park right next to our house. And so we walked over with a bucket of balls, and we just did some of those things. So really trying to find those intentional, if that's the word that I want to use, connectivity points to have that ministry, that they can see that. And I love that story that you shared about, both Curtis and Claire mimicking that, because I've seen that in my life for my kids. So there might be time, even in sermon prep, there was a time where I was like, oh man, Dad's got to go and get this. And the older two sat down and said, well, we'll write a sermon, Dad. And so they just start on their little, because remote learning has done wonders for them apparently in their keyboard use. And so they were like, hey, I want to write one too. And it was interesting because, in pastoral talk, we have different translations, right? We have NIV, we have ESV, and depending on where we're studying, some are more word for word, some are more thought for thought. And I saw that play itself out in my older two. So Trey was more like literal word for word, like he is taking scripture, he is putting it down into it, and that's how he rolled. Well, Ella was more like thought for thought, and she was ordering and getting stuff that she knew that she wanted to communicate. And it was really, an affirming piece to be able to do that and see that. And so, again, another offshoot. I'll just keep going all over the place here. I'm squirting like a watermelon seed as you try to nail some of these down, Brian. But he's like, one of the greatest things for me is that takes root, right? And you said ministry starts at home. Right before we moved here, I got a chance to baptize my son at Cloverdale in Idaho, and that was one of the biggest parts of my life. And then just this past, right before we went, it was Easter Sunday. Right before we went on our little vacation we talked about, I got to baptize my daughter. And to see those things and have them make that decision, not something for me, that was huge. And so when you can see those incremental growth things, when you can see them following and mimicking, and like you said, maybe as little at times as they are, it's a mirror, because it's a reflection to be able to see how are we handling it, because kids are so honest. And, there's parts in TV shows even now. I think I saw one that said, kids say the darndest things, right? Because they just do that. And it's so authentic. It's so real. If you wanted to know how you are, just take a look at your kids at times, and you'll probably see some of that. So anyhow, yes, really seeing that through. And I think some of my greatest moments in ministry, because they mean so much, is watching my kids' testimony play itself out in a meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. Just coincidentally, one of the last things that I did before I left Cloverdale was baptize my oldest two sons. So yeah, in fact, they were baptized on the same day, and like I said, I got to baptize them in the same baptismal you baptized your son at Cloverdale, right? Yeah. So yeah, which is awesome. But okay, one of the other things, just to kind of switch gears a little bit here, one of the other things that we talked about is the role of our wives, right, and our spouses. Again, this is another kind of traditional black eye of the church, right? Is that there are some that believe if they hire you as the pastor, they are also hiring your spouse, right, and or your family as free labor. Now, this is again one of the other things that I think we need to just kind of call out and address, and to say that if you are in a situation where there is that expectation of your spouse and of your family, right, that because you are the pastor, because they are paying you, that everybody needs to come to work, I will tell you that is false. Okay, that is not true. And in fact, your compensation should not be structured that way. That if the church hires you, then they hire you and only you, right? And now if your family chooses to volunteer, just like anybody else volunteers in the church, that's up to them, right? But it should not be a requirement of your job. Now, as you said, right, is that your wife does serve the church, and she's also paid to do so, right? She is on staff, right? So again, if and I've heard that as well, couples that serve together, that they're in different roles, whatever it is, but make sure if that's where you are, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But making sure that the church knows, right, that they are employing both of you and that you are being compensated as such.
Right. Well, it says a worker is worthy of their wage. And I think, as we look at those things, or if we look at roles, I think that there can be seasons, obviously, where, people can help get something off the ground if there's a need. But, I think to have that be a long-term solution, oftentimes that puts a ceiling on different things, where if they are running with a children's program, usually historically is another one of those, or they play the piano, so they're supposed to help with worship, or any of those kind of things. Oftentimes that will, if you identify that's a true need, I would say try to work yourself out of it. Now, like you said, we've been very fortunate with wherever we've gone that, we've worked together in ministry. And so that compensation's there. So that's helpful, and the value in it, especially since we have two different skill sets, that really being able to use those and the strengths that we have in our own personal life, we also use in ministry as well. That, like you said, there's not a 24/7 part, but I think, there is a hard part when your wife works for you as well, that I can't, gloss over. I mean, I think that creates its own dynamics that can be
Sure it does. Yeah.
a difficulty, right? Because it is tough to be the compassionate husband that needs help in those things, but yet still be the boss. And I think, even with best intentions, I'd probably say, if Courtney was on right now for an interview, she'd probably say, yeah, there's times where I'd rather be Courtney the wife than Courtney the employee that works for you. And so I think that that's true. So really, again, knowing, how do you balance that? How do you work through that? But if you can, I think that those same things that you do to be successful in your marriage and your own personal life are part of the ministry. And again, it can build some of that added connectivity because they have insight into what you're going through with what you're doing. And I mean, even if your wife's not, we've all been in that situation where maybe you have a different job. Maybe you're a layperson, you're listening to this right now, and you come home with a really tough day and your wife has no idea. Or maybe, guys, we're the ones that are biggest offenders. We walk in and, maybe you have a stay-at-home wife and your first reaction is to be like, what happened here today? Maybe don't lead in with that. Maybe there was a lot of things that went on with your kids and otherwise, that she was just keeping the ship afloat. And for you to come in and drop that bomb probably isn't going to get you a lot of points. So really, yes, understanding how those roles work, how they play in, and how to balance those. Because when both parents are serving maximum hours, of course, again, what we've talked about, you have to be more intentional with how do you incorporate the rest of the family. It's not just one person doing that. Both are sacrificially giving at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, that was one of the things that, excuse me, that we communicated very clearly with Oregon Trail when we came here, was that, again, they were hiring me. Now, again, Maureen has some very significant roles, obviously, in my own life and in our marriage. Again, we carry each other's burdens. Wow, I cannot talk right now. Definitely we are working together, but yet, and she does serve in the church, but she also has her own career outside of our home, as well as, running our family together. And so, she's very busy. And so that was something that Oregon Trail did very well, I would say, is that they really respected the fact that Maureen was working outside in her own career, that we had our family time. And like I said, we've been very blessed with that they've been, very respectful of that. But yeah, at the same time, Maureen has played some major roles, right, in the church and the revitalization. And part of our success is because of things that she's done and led and worked through. And so she's definitely been a part of that. Now, I say during our youth ministry years, right, especially when the boys were little, through the pregnancies and through different stuff, there was seasons where she was very, very involved. And there was other seasons where she really wasn't involved, depending on the seasons of her own career and of our family and the ages of our kids and those kinds of things. And I think, and just know that's okay, right? It's going to kind of ebb and flow. But again, the point being is that your job should not be dependent on how involved your spouse is, right? And, or your kids are. Now, to say that's one of the things that stands out to me about when we came to Oregon Trail. When we were at Cloverdale, like I said, there was times when Maureen was really involved. There's other times when she wasn't, in seasons. And like I said, our kids were small. In fact, our oldest, Colin, he was just going into middle school when we came to Oregon Trail. And so that was part of the reasons why we moved then too, is just the transition of our family already, right, of moving out of elementary school for him. But I think it's been very significant, though, that when we came to Oregon Trail, that it was something that our family signed on to. Right. And when we got here, like I said, I've seen all of my kids step up and lead and serve in lots of different roles.
And they have played a big part, right, in our success at Oregon Trail, because it hasn't been just me, and we have truly served as a family. And I think that's where, again, has been huge, right, into connecting into the community, and you know, whether it's been through their sports, through school stuff, through, you know, the connections my wife had in the school district, through, because she's a teacher, by the way. I mean, that's her profession outside of that. So, you know, again, my family has played a major role in the success of the church and the growth of the church and what God's done here. And so they're very significant, right? And again, they have, and they again deserve a lot of the credit as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I've heard families that have taken it even, you know, as they go to the mission field and stuff, that, you know, one of the things is communication. And I've heard families that have given their kids uh, a stake as shareholders to get to vote. Now, they have done that under the premise that they've all been praying about it, obviously, and that's God's prompting. But when they've raised kids where they feel like, yes, this is where we have to go, because this is where God's calling us, that level of buy-in is different, and that there's not this resentment or some of those things that take place. And I'd say that even took place here, or is currently taking place with my family. You know, I mean, I think this first year in a unique place where, you know, it's notorious for trying to annex itself from the United States with CHOP and CHAZ and having these autonomous zones and things. Um, you know, our kids didn't have that core group to plug in with and stuff. And so, like my oldest has verbalized at times where, Daddy, I know we're supposed to be here because God needs us to be here, but I really miss back in Boise. And so, I mean, I know those things are real. We have to constantly have communication with our families. I think that along the way, having family, you know, conversations to check in. What is the temperature? Where are you at? Where are things at? And you know, in fact, when we close this today, one of the things we're doing is going to look at the potential of a private school, so that, and I've never been a private school person. I went through public school. We were in public school in Boise, but there are just so many things here that are difficult, with the passing of R90, you know, with teaching sex ed and starts in kindergarten, and all the different things, including the LGBTQT portion of that. And so there's a lot of really difficult things that our kids are inundated with here. And so how do we do that? And it's not even those topics, because I don't think that our kids are completely aware of them. But like our oldest said, Daddy, I think I'd like to go to a different school because I think maybe they would be more consequences in the classroom. Like, I think that the kids get away with a lot of stuff that we didn't used to be able to get away with. And so again, you know, sometimes we get gummed up with restrictions or structure with our kids of like, oh, they're so cute, let them go by. Like, to hear that verbalized from my oldest one, that like, man, we need this. Like, this is even crazy. And like, he's the one that's always bouncing off walls, that desires nothing more than to have a helmet on his head and be running into things and tackling people. So when he says that, you know, it takes pause as a parent to know and to understand what he's going through, what he's seen through his eyes, and how that's just different, or maybe just working off a completely different rubric than we would as a family. And so knowing what your kids are going through, knowing how that's helping them, and that's good and bad. I'm talking about cultural stuff in the city we're serving, but even in ministry. Like, how are we doing this? How are we doing this well? What are areas? And so one of the things I know we were going to talk about is just like even the role. And so I'll lead in with him is on a Sunday, you could find him doing a multitude of different things. He's kind of got the utility belt of most likely recently he is in the nursery during the 10:30 service, and he loves playing with the kids, and the kids love playing with him. I wish that he would play that well with his younger siblings, but the teachers love him, and that's part of his ministry. He also helps with the media side at times, and helping with the cameras when need be. And so there's been elements where they serve, and he enjoys it, like, because it's his role that he can take on. And so again, they do different parts, and we have a campus, so to speak, another venue in our gym where we simulcast our service to. And so they help set up with that. They help with picking up communion and doing some of those things. And so like after the cups have all been used and stuff like that, after we've taken communion. And so they're finding ways to serve and engage in different ways. And that's so humbling and so awesome to do. And I wish that I could help take credit, but Courtney does a really good job with nurturing and loving on them to make sure that is something that they do. Because it gives them an opportunity for, you talked about your wife as far as teaching. I had some teaching in my background as being a Bible teacher and stuff, but I think that's one of the hardest parts. You can teach people, and this isn't a Sadducee Pharisee kind of part, but it's the application piece, like not just having this head knowledge, whatever the curriculum is, but putting it into play. And I think that's one of the things for me as a pastor that I desire is that application piece. Like, inviting people to church on Sunday is huge. That's important, and to get them in a community. But remember, we have 6 days out of the week that you also, as lay people or in different avenues or spheres of influence that you have, to really reach people in a way that us pastors can't. And so, just to remember that is a role of significance for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, looking at different places, like I said, my wife as an educator, she helps with our kids area. Again, she's one of the teachers there, and she plays a big role there, as well as in our women's ministry. Again, and those are areas that she wants to work in. And I look at my kids, again, my boys do all kinds of things, and again, and that's one of our core values is that excuse me, is that all generations contribute, and so. We have teenagers and kids serving in lots of different areas within our church. And again, my kids truly lead the way in that, whether it's in the sound booth, on the computer, doing the words, even on the worship team. My middle son, Curtis, he plays guitar and drums and sings some. And then, and again, they help in the nursery, in the kids area as well. They're just all over. And so, they all have those roles. They all have those things that they do and that they contribute. And that's, again, definitely seeing, in fact, they're in so many different areas that, in fact, when we are here on a Sunday, is that we're never together really at church because of everywhere that they're serving and kind of all these different places. And in fact, I've literally had some people ask me, they're like, okay, who is your wife? Like, who are your kids? Because we're never together when we're at church. And so, and until I kind of point them out, they don't even know who my family is sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we had an opportunity, we were saying goodbye to a young family and, saying hello to, we just got a new director for our child center that we run here, on Monday through Friday. And so we got a chance to pray over them, and it was so good. Our congregation knows Courtney. Again, we're a little bit smaller, but to invite her up, and she was the one that was able to give the ladies like some flowers, and she does all those thoughtful things again with communication. And so she's very intentional. And you go down the list, and we've talked about the significance of families, but I think having a wife that supports what you do and understands that is so vital to ministry. Like, if you and your wife are not on the same page, or you and your husband, if you're the woman that's in ministry, man, that's a recipe for very difficult, strenuous times. And so, we know that as being equally yoked, but also in the part of buy-in. And so I think if you are looking at stepping into a role or entertaining one of those things, really be working through this with your family. And, we say communication, and I think I've said it before, Gary Moore from Cloverdale would go a step further. He uses his mum's the word, like mutual understanding method. So not just communication, but a mutual understanding on a common ground to be able to say, here's what our core expectations are. Here's what we have. And honestly, it's the most freeing thing that I can say in my ministry, but it also is like, I can do what I do and I'm a good version of myself. And I totally get the adage now of behind every good man is a great woman. And so like, I can fully attest to that and give a hearty amen with that standpoint, because what people see, with Sundays and those things and all the things that we're able to do, including meet people at the hospital, is because of the buy-in of our family, because of my wife and what she does behind the scenes. And especially if she has another job, like Maureen in your situation, the fact that she does that sacrifice where she is doing her stuff, but then when you need that, she steps in and spans that gap for you. That's such an important piece to anybody's ministry. So I would say, man, make sure that you guys are on the same page, that you guys can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I second that amen, right? Again, I have a great woman behind me and supporting me in lots of ways. And again, our families, again, we are both very blessed, right? With our families and our wives and our kids and just everybody and the support that they give. So with that, to that great season, I think, our first season on air and doing this, like I said, we've covered a lot of things, and, from just talking about our own stories is kind of how we opened the season. And then we, saw kind of where we started with our first few weeks and months, and our new churches, as we both stepped into existing churches, which again is kind of the premise of our podcast, how our online presence, how we've dealt with COVID, kind of all these different things. Change, how do we change? We had this interview with Jim Lyon. Again, we talked about, again, our good friend Mel Snyder, that was from both of us in his life, and he suddenly passed away, and just his influence in us. I mean, again, we've covered a lot of ground here in this season. Again, we'd love to hear from you guys as our listeners of what you've taken away, how the podcast has helped you, and what you'd like to hear in the future. And again, one of the things we've talked about is we do want to do some more interviews, and that's one of the things we want to do in future seasons is have a little more often of hearing some other outside voices other than just us. And so we are, that's one of our goals for next season. But again, thanks for hanging with us through this whole first season. And as we've figured out some things on the tech side and kind of all those things as well. But we're if you've made it this far, congratulations, right? That you've put up with some bad audio and some different things. But again, we are thankful again to be able to do this podcast, and that we get to stay connected with you, and we'd love to hear back from you and some ideas for future episodes or idea of someone that you'd love to hear us interview or to go through. And so, TJ, are we ready to wrap season 1?
I think we are, but I would echo that same sentiment. I'm grateful for those. And my prayer is that it's an encouragement, right? That in the midst of all of those follies that we have, whether that's a technical thing or anything, that Jesus is the subject in the midst of all of those things, that like his grace is sufficient, not only for eternity for us, but even in the moments, that this would be an encouragement to whoever hears it, that they would be strengthened by it, and that it would be one of those moments to boldly say, well, for lack of a better term, hell no to Satan. So like, I think those are the moments that I, really appreciate about this. And as we look forward, again, like you said, get ready for season 2, look for us in August as we get ready to gear back up and get ready to find out where God takes us next.
Acts 20:28. So guard yourselves and God's people. Feed and shepherd God's flock, his church, purchased with his own blood, over which the Holy Spirit has appointed you as leaders. The Acts 2028 podcast is a broadcast production of In His Grip Publishing. Our theme music is Achievement by Giovanni Bruno. We'd love to hear from you on our social media accounts or through email. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at Acts 2028 Podcast, or send us an email at acts2028podcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, leave us ratings and reviews, and even give us your email so you can be notified of new episodes. Thank you for listening, and until next time, we hope that you will lead wherever God has put you, and together we can all live out Acts 20:28 as we serve in the established church.